Okay, amigos, hola. This is our 11th class, la clase número 11. Here we've learned a number of things, including the basic verbs. All verbs in Spanish end in AR, ER, or IR. We also learned some forms, and in both of these cases, with the AR, ER, IR, and ser and estar, we've concentrated on singular subjects, the singular pronouns for all of these, and we've given you the correct form so that the form of these verbs matches, agrees with the subject. So we've shown you how to do that. There will be adjectives, some of the old ones that we've already learned, and others to describe physical characteristics and personality. And then we saw that we use a different verb when we're talking about feelings. So a lot to cover. Also, some foods and beverages that we can use, say, with the me gusta, no me gusta structure that we've learned. We want to first learn some subject pronouns. These are the words that are the subject of a sentence, but they're pronouns. They stand in for proper nouns, names, etc., so that you're not repeating Mario. You can say sometimes he, and you don't want to repeat Josefina this and Josefina that, so you might substitute she. So those are called subject pronouns in both English and Spanish. Yo, yo, yo. Tú, tú. This means you, a singular you. You're looking at someone, talking to them, and note that Spanish differentiates if you're talking to someone with whom you could be what we call familiar, such as the list that's here, versus someone with whom you would have to speak with certain respect or formality. In a case of formality, such as speaking to the president or someone, say you're a teenager and you're speaking to an adult that you don't know, you would use the form usted, usted. So both tú and usted mean a singular you, looking at someone, talking to them, referring to them. But one is for familiar circumstances, and one is someone with whom you would have to treat them with respect and some formality. El, el. Note, by the way, this el has an accent mark. We've already learned another el that does not have an accent mark, the, for masculine singular nouns. This means he. So el with an accent mark is a subject pronoun meaning he, and el without an accent mark is the definite article the. Ella, ella, ella. There does not happen to be an it as a subject in Spanish. In those cases, you merely start the sentence with a verb, such as it is raining, it is a nice day, it is from another planet. In this lesson, I've divided the singular from the plural. We're not dealing with plural subjects, such as we and they and you all, yous guys. Those are all plural, and they have their own forms. We will be learning those next week. So the yo, tú, usted, él, ella are all singular subject pronouns. This is unique to Spanish because verbs have their own endings corresponding to the particular subjects, I, he, she, you, etc. You may omit the subject pronoun. That is something you cannot do in English. English requires you to have a complete sentence to have a subject and a verb. Spanish, you can get by with just starting a sentence with the verb. Now that we've shown you what you can do in having a sentence, you can have a proper noun, Mario, Maria, etc. You can have a subject pronoun to take the place of those words, or, as we've seen in Spanish, you may omit those words. Now we're going to deal with the words that follow, the verbs, and talk about what you do with the verbs. What changes take place in the verbs depending on what the subject is, who the subject is. The first two verbs we're going to deal with are the most basic, that is ser and estar. And it is a problem for English speakers because both ser and estar mean to be, Now, if you have a situation like this where there are two ways to say the same thing, you have to ask yourself each time, which one am I going to use for this given circumstance? We will explain how you differentiate the cases, the situations that help you then decide which one of these two verbs that both mean to be, which one to use. Before we talk about when you use each of these two verbs, in which circumstances, we want to give you the singular forms of the verb ser and then the singular form of the verb estar. And the forms of the verbs just mean that you are conjugating the verb, putting the verb in the correct form based on the subject, who the subject is. In terms of plural forms of ser, we have three options. If the subject is yo, we're going to say soy. Tú eres. Él or ella or usted, you're going to use the form es. Again, yo soy. Tú eres. Él, ella, and usted es. Here are some sentences in which I'm taking a subject pronoun, I'm putting the correct form of ser, and I'm saying a sentence, as in, yo soy de Pensilvania. Tú eres un doctor. Ella es una profesora. And now we'll take the verb estar and give you its singular forms when we are conjugating that particular verb. Here are the three forms of estar in singular circumstances. Yo estoy. Tú estás. Él, ella, usted, any of those three, está. Note that they're using the same subject pronoun, so we're not changing those. All we're dealing with is taking the basic form of the verb, estar, and putting it in the correct form depending on which of these subjects, which of these pronouns is the subject of the sentence. Yo estoy bien. Tú estás mal. Mario está contento. Yo estoy bien, tú estás mal, Mario está contento. Okay, we first learned the forms of estar, putting them in sentences and changing the verb so that it agrees with whoever the subject is. Now we're going to talk about when you use estar, and this is important because remember estar and ser both mean to be. So I need to know when am I going to use estar and when am I going to use ser. I'm not giving you all of the uses for estar. This week we're going to talk about only one, when you're expressing how someone feels, as in they're sick, they're sad, they're happy, they're mad. We will use the verb estar and put it in the correct form. Yo estoy enfermo. Yo estoy enfermo. And you're asking yourself, why isn't yo written here? Because I remember I told you, you may omit the subject in Spanish. So I can say it, write it, or just think it. But if I am using yo, I need to make sure I have the correct form, estoy. Ella está triste hoy. Ella está triste hoy. And we have to note that these feelings are like colors or physical traits. These are adjectives, and we want our adjectives to always agree with the word that they describe. In this case, I know that because the basic form of enfermo ends in an O, there are four possibilities for endings: O, A, os, and as. Because this is an O and it's singular, I know that the yo that they're talking about that is in this sentence happens to be a singular male. And down here, triste, because it doesn't end in O, it ends in something other than an O. This particular adjective only has two forms, triste and tristes. Because ella is singular, we want ella to agree with the verb, but we also want it to agree with this adjective. Lots to think about, lots to remember, but it is important that you do so each time. Now we're leaving estar, which is used for feelings, and going over to the verb ser, trying to figure out, when do I use ser? Without spending any time on this, we want to remember that we did learn to use ser for telling time. So one of the uses of ser is to tell time. Another use of ser is to express the day of the week or the date. And we use ser for a description, either physical traits, are they tall, are they thin, etc., are they blonde, but also what I call personality traits. Are they intelligent? Are they friendly? Are they good people? Es alto e inteligente. Es amable. Es una buena persona. All of these, we're using a form of ser, es. We are not using a subject here. You could, we haven't, and we don't really know who we're talking about here because there is no subject. But in a real conversation, someone would know based on, previous reference, someone pointing at someone or showing a photograph, etc. Okay, here, so we're using ser or we're using estar. So we have two considerations. you need to pick the verb. Which one are we using? And that's based on the uses, when you use, that we've just covered. And then we want to put it in the correct form for the particular sentence. Remember, you're doing that based on who the subject is. So you have to remember those forms, and then you have to decide, whether it's ser or estar and put it in the correct form. Ella está muy loca. Ella está muy loca. We're using estar here because it is a feeling of craziness, no? And it is ella, so we're using the form está. Mario es muy alto. Mario es muy alto. A form of ser, because we're expressing a physical characteristic, height. And es, because the subject is Mario. Ella está contenta en la clase. Ella está contenta en la clase. This is a feeling, happy to be in class, and so we use the verb estar, and it is está because the subject is ella. Here is one of our key questions. ¿Cómo está la muchacha? Would be asking how she is, how she's feeling. If I say, ¿Cómo es la muchacha? I'm asking for a description of her, a physical description or of her personality. Here we have a thing that we're describing. It obeys the same rules. Because it is a description, we are going to use a form of ser. In this case, it's going to be es because it's referring to a singular restaurant. It's not I, it's not you, it is the restaurant, kind of like it. And so we go with es. Expressing a feeling, yo estoy enfermo. Giving a description of El libro de Ramón, Ramon's book, es enorme, es enorme. El libro de Ramón es enorme. Describing biology class, it's long, so es muy larga. Es muy larga, not estar, we're not expressing a feeling, we're talking about the class, we're describing it, we're giving a characteristic of it, so we're going to use ser because it's singular, third person as they say, it's going to be es. A personality trait, antipática, and we're going to use ser, and the form that we're using, because the subject is tú, is eres. Note that antipático is changed to antipática here because the you, we know, it happens to be a singular woman. Someone is talking to a woman or a girl and says, oh, tú eres muy antipática. Description of Kent, therefore we're using ser, and the correct form would be es. Kent es una ciudad grande. El profesor de español es interesante. Description of the profesor, not a physical description, but one of kind of personality, I guess you would say. He's not boring, es interesante, so we're going to use the verb ser, and the correct form would be es. El profesor de español está bien. Now, why in the previous slide did we use es? Well, it was description. And why are we using está, a form of estar here? Because we're talking about how he's doing, how he feels. He feels well. Therefore, we're using está. El profesor de español es bueno. Es bueno. Why ser? Because we are describing his quality, I guess you would say. So it's not a feeling. We use ser. In the correct form, again, es. Tú estás muy enojada. So enojada is angry, and we're expressing how someone feels. We say tú, therefore it's going to be estás, the form of estar. The correct form for tú is estás. Note here that I'm saying enojada. Again, that tells me that the person I'm talking to is a female. Remember that to express how people feel, we are going to be using estar. And we need some adjectives that are adjectives that express feeling. So these are not physical traits like tall, short, thin, blonde. These are feelings, and these will be used with a form of estar. However, they are adjectives, they're feelings, but like colors and physical traits, they are adjectives, and we need to make the adjectives always agree with the person they're describing, the word that they're modifying, it's called. Agreement is very important in Spanish. Our key question is ¿Cómo estás? We learned this in our first lesson, but it refers to how someone feels, and we're using a form of estar, talking to you. So I say ¿Cómo estás? These are feelings. Enojado, enojado. Contento, contento. Alegre, alegre. So contento and alegre mean the same thing. They're happy, content. Again, I want to not harp too much on agreement, but it's so critical that I want to point out a few things here. Enojado and contento as adjectives will have 4 possible forms because the basic form ends in O. Alegre, because it ends in E, will have 2 forms, one singular, one plural. Preocupado, 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 worried. Ocupada, ocupada, ocupada. Notice that's busy, and we are using the A form because we're referring to a woman. Ocupada. It has 4 forms. Cansado, cansado, cansado. Worn out, tired. Triste, triste, triste. Triste as an adjective will have 2 forms possible. Either bien, or if you're fortunate, muy bien. Bien, muy bien. ¿Cómo estás? Bien. ¿Cómo estás? Muy bien. And you could respond, estoy bien, because you're saying, yo estoy bien, answering the question directed at you, or yo estoy muy bien. Again, we're using estar in this case, in these cases, because they are feelings. We're telling how different people feel. So, ella está enferma, yo estoy contento, tú estás cansado. We're moving on now from feelings and using the verb estar to physical characteristics and personalities. Still using adjectives, but moving over to the verb ser. Also still using the same subject pronouns. They don't change, just the verb changes and its forms. Key question here is como es, not como está. Como es. When I hear como es, it wants to elicit a description of physical traits or personality. We saw these before. Rubio, rubio versus moreno, moreno. Opuestos here, opposites, right? Alto, alto versus bajo, bajo. Both of these adjectives, because they end in O, have 4 possible forms. And you have to agree with what you're describing. If you're talking about a tall man, it's going to be alto. If you're talking about a tall female, it's going to be alta. And the same goes for bajo. Gordo, gordo. Delgado, delgado. Simpática or amable. Simpática, amable. Okay, both of these mean the same, but let's talk about their circumstance in Spanish. One changes because we're talking about this young lady, this young, nice, friendly young lady, simpática versus simpático if this had been a man. Amable stays the same whether it's a woman or a man because the adjective ends in E. Antipáticos, antipáticos. It's plural here because all these people, these people in both of these graphics are being mean and nasty to someone. So because it's plural and it's a mix of masculine and feminine, we're going to go with antipáticos. Honesto, honesto. Interesante, interesante. Inteligente, inteligente. Not to go on and on, but how many forms of inteligente are there? Well, because it ends in an E, there are only 2. Inteligente and inteligentes, if there were 2 people here that were smart. Here you'll notice that I pluralized for 2 females. I said trabajadoras, trabajadoras. Both of them are hard-working people. Trabajadoras. And Homer is always, as we know, muy perezoso. Perezoso. Always looking for the easy way. Perezoso. As opposed to this young man who is muy enérgico. 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 Okay, we're moving on from ser and estar to some common verbs, and we'll talk about them, the verb meanings and then the verb forms. Bailar, bailar. Beber, beber. Leer, leer. Vivir, vivir. I'm going to call attention, just stop and call attention to the fact that all of these verbs that I'm giving you end in R. That means they are the infinitives. The infinitive is a fancy way of saying nobody is doing these verbs yet. The R ending for verbs in Spanish corresponds to what we do in English. We say to and the verb, as in to eat. Nobody's eating, it's just the verb to eat. It's not I, it's not you, eat, eats, it's just to eat. And when they end in R in Spanish, that's what we're doing. It's before anyone is doing the particular activity. We're not conjugating the verb yet. Escribir, escribir. Hablar por teléfono, hablar por teléfono. Textear, textear. Correr, correr. Comprender, comprender. Aprender, aprender. Trabajar, trabajar. To work. Trabajar. Cocinar, cocinar. Estudiar, estudiar. As to estudiar español. Estudiar. Okay, we're going to take our first set of verbs that are called AR verbs, meaning they end with AR. And remember, the R corresponds to and the verb, to eat, to run, to go, etc. And this week, I've broken it into between singular and plural. So we're learning 3 forms of each verb. We learned 3 forms of ser, we learned 3 forms of estar, and we're going to learn 3 forms of AR verbs. We are working in the present tense, and the present tense in Spanish is a little bit more flexible than it is the present tense, the simple present tense in English. You can talk about what someone does at a specific time or frequency, as in I work at 5 o'clock or I sleep every night, to also say what someone is doing in the moment. So it can be used for either of those circumstances. Our key question is ¿qué haces? ¿Qué haces? Which means, again, either what do you do? What do you do in a particular circumstance? Or what do you do as in your life's work? Or, hey, what are you doing right now? What are you doing over there? ¿Qué haces? For both of these circumstances. I gave you some verbs in lesson 10, so you can refer to those. I think I've put all the verbs that we're conjugating here on your vocabulary sheet. Here is the verb cantar and the 3 forms in the singular for cantar. Here are those pronouns again that aren't changing. They pop up every time you have a sentence. Yo canto. Yo canto. Tú cantas. Tú cantas. Él, ella, usted canta. Él, ella, or usted go with the form canta. So you have to choose the correct form. In the example I gave you in class, we do this in English. For example, I eat, he eats. Note we change the ending. Or I am, you are, he is. You can't say I are, you is. We have to have the correct form of the verb to match the subject pronoun. Here's a key question about Saturdays. ¿Qué haces los sábados? Well, yo bailo con mis amigos. ¿Qué haces solo? What do you do alone? Yo miro la tele. I watch TV. Yo miro la tele. Some other examples. Ella baila mucho. María trabaja con Juan. Tú cocinas tacos hoy. And yo escucho la música. Putting the verb in the correct form based on who the subject is. That's all we're doing here. You do it in English, you do it in Spanish. It's just that Spanish tends to have a few more changes. But we're looking at 3 changes for each verb so far. Okay, we had our ser and estar. Then we had some basic AR verbs. Now we're moving on to some basic ER or IR verbs. And we need to learn the 3 forms that we will be using for them. So it's the same process again. You follow the patterns. The verb comer, which is an ER verb, and the yo form is yo como. The to form is tú comes. Él, ella, usted come. The 3 forms of comer, depending on the subject. Then we move over to the verb vivir, vivir. And the yo form is yo vivo, tú vives, él, ella, usted vive. And you should compare the ER verb endings and the IR verb endings. O to O, ES, ES, E, E. so we can say they are exactly the same. Ella come mucho. María bebe refrescos. Tú lees un libro. Yo vivo en Kent. Taking these ER-IR verbs, checking what the subject is, making sure the verb ending agrees with whatever the subject is. Here we're using the same sample questions that I used for the AR verbs, and we've got a couple of ER verbs to answer. ¿Qué haces los sábados? Oh, Saturdays, yo leo con mis amigos. We've got a book club. Yo leo con mis amigos. And ¿qué haces solo when you're alone? Yo bebo un vaso de leche. I drink a glass of milk to calm myself down. Here's some additional foods and beverages, la comida y la bebida, that we could use with the me gusta, no me gusta, me encanta structure. La leche, la leche. El vino, el vino. El agua, el agua. El jugo, el jugo. This particular type of jugo would be jugo de naranja. La sopa, la sopa. El pan, el pan. La ensalada, la ensalada. El sándwich, el sándwich. El yogur, el yogur. El cereal, el cereal. La carne, la carne. El queso, el queso. La manzana, la manzana. La naranja, la naranja. El plátano, el plátano. These last three vocabulary items belong to a category, la fruta, you'll remember. La fruta, as in me gusta la fruta. Me gusta la fruta. Me gusta la leche. No me gusta el jugo de naranja. Sentences that you can use with the gustar. Me encanta. Me encanta. What? Me encanta el agua. Here we have a plural. Las verduras. Las verduras. Las verduras. So a lot of content in this lesson. I wish you well as you go through it. Go through it a couple of times. And remember, if you have any questions, to click on the bottom of the page at the home page where it says email. Feel free to email me any questions that you might have. Hope you have fun learning and practicing. And we'll see you next week.